I want to start with something that may feel like a little bit of a relief to hear. Cravings are not actually a problem, they are just signals. Now, sometimes when we think about what they're signaling, sometimes they actually are signaling physical hunger. Sometimes they're signaling fatigue or sleep deprivation, sometimes stress or boredom or loneliness. Sometimes it's a lack of carbohydrate throughout the day, so your body needs some energy or simply the need for a bit of a pause. And in the metabolism momentum method, our goal is not to eliminate cravings, it is to build the capacity to experience them without immediately reacting to them. Now, that capacity is something that you can think of as emotional endurance here. Now, research from cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance based approaches shows that when people learn skills like distraction or grounding or urge surfing, their emotional reactivity and binge frequency decreases. It's not because those cravings disappear, but instead because people learn how to respond instead of react. And that small pause between urge and action is where we also build some self trust. So let's talk about why this works. Why are we talking about riding the wave? Because cravings function a lot like waves. They rise, they peak, and they fall away. So if you act on them immediately every time at that peak, your brain strengthens that cue, behavior, and reward loop, and it really starts to become automatic on autopilot. But when you delay, even briefly, you begin what's called extinction learning. So you're weakening that automatic reinforcement pathway. Now, you're not suppressing the craving, you're just teaching your brain that an urge does not require obedience. And that's a really powerful shift. So let's talk about how do we actually do this in real life. So there are three de-escalation tools that I want to discuss with you or practice this week. Now, keep in mind, you can practice these and still act on the craving later. The key is really the delay and then reevaluating. So the first tool here is distraction. And I do want to be clear that this is redirection, not avoidance. So research shows that urges often peak and pass within about 20 minutes. So even a short delay can meaningfully reduce the intensity of an urge or craving. So imagine that it's 9 p.m., dinner's cleaned up, the house is quiet, and your brain says snack or I want something sweet. So instead of walking to the pantry on autopilot, you just set a 5-minute timer. Maybe you fold a load of laundry real quick. Maybe you step outside for some fresh air. Maybe you take a shower. Maybe you text a friend or something. Do something brief and intentional. And you're not saying, I'm never going to go do this. You're just saying, not right now. And that small shift really builds in some control for you. Now, the second option here, we have grounding. Now, this can sound a little funny, but when cravings are emotionally driven, your nervous system is usually activated. So you're not just hungry, you're dysregulated. So grounding just helps bring you back into the present moment. It signals safety, it signals calm to your brain. Now, there are other methods, but one simple method you can think of is a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. Or, close enough to it. It may sound simple, it may sound kind of silly, but sensory awareness pulls you out of your reactive mode and back into a responsive mode. And often that shift alone lowers that craving intensity. The third tool is urge surfing. So urge surfing, where we talk about riding the wave, that comes from mindfulness-based relapse prevention work. So instead of fighting the craving, you just observe it. You're just the observer. So imagine it as a wave rising in your body. Where do you feel it? Is it in your chest, your stomach, your head? Take slow breaths and maybe consider the phrase, this is just a sensation and I can experience it without acting on it. So the peak of this craving may feel fairly intense, but if you stay with it, even for 2 minutes, it begins to fall off. Now, you do not have to act on a craving to move past it, and that's really emotional endurance in action. I do want to stress we have learned that fun foods, they're not off the table. We want to be able to have them, and you can still choose to go and grab whatever it is you're wanting, but we want to interrupt that wave. So now let's make this a little more practical. It's 3 p.m. at work, the urge hits, and instead of autopilot, you pause. You can even rate the urge from 1 to 10 if you feel like it, but you set that 2-minute timer and breathe and notice the sensations, and then reevaluate the urge later. If it drops from an 8 to a 6, that's progress. If you still decide to eat, you plate it, if possible. You sit down and eat slowly. You don't work while you eat. Now, you interrupted autopilot, and maybe next time you set the timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and at some point you forget that you had the craving or urge to begin with. So momentum's not about perfection. It's that awareness and intentional action. So try to decide on one of these ahead of time, because when you're actually triggered, it's really tough to actually make that decision. So ask yourself, when is your highest risk time? What emotion is usually driving it? Just get a little step ahead of here and use one of these de-escalation strategies a couple times this week. Make a mental note of that urge intensity or the strategy you used, and you're really not eliminating these cravings. We're just responding intentionally rather than just reacting.